Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Jaykant, heading marketing at Dialytics. I'll be the moderator for today's session. First of all, I would like to thank everyone for taking your time and attending this webinar. This webinar will be recorded, and all the registered participants and attendees will receive a link to the recording. The total duration of this webinar will be 40 minutes. First 25 minutes will be a panel discussion between Shyam Panda and Sukanta Padi, followed by 5 minutes of demo, and then we'll have a 10 minutes of Q&A session towards the end. Let me first introduce our speakers for today's webinar. First, I would like to welcome Mr. Shyam Panda, who is the founder and CEO of Dialytics. Shyam has over 2 decades of extensive experience in delivering data analytics solutions. He has led large teams to deliver analytical solutions in supply chain planning, supply chain execution, manufacturing, procurement, and order fulfillment, and so on. This team has implemented extremely highly complex analytical solutions in the industries like pharma, food manufacturing, semiconductor, and retail industry. He is an alumni from NIT Rourkela and holds an MBA from XIM Bhubaneswar. Welcoming our second panelist, Mr. Sukanta Padi, who is the supply chain management expert and also partner in Canpice Consulting. Sukanta has over 3 decades of expertise working in supply chain management, manufacturing, operations, and information technologies. He has held several executive positions like Chief Information Officer, Chief Supply Chain Officer, and also held several executive leadership functional roles in major MNCs like Yokohama, Cummins, and Alliance Tire Group. He is an alumni from IIT Kharagpur and a PG diploma holder in industrial engineering from NIT Mumbai. He is currently working towards his PhD in sustainable supply chain management. Now let's hear it from the panel. Over to you, Shyam.
Thanks, Jaykant. Hi, everyone. Good morning and good evening, depending, or good afternoon, depending on where you are joining from. I'm Shyam Panda. I will start with a little bit of overview about Dialytics. I started Dialytics in 2011 after spending more than a decade delivering analytic solutions for various different customers. We started in the US and we also have operations in India and Canada as well. Over the last 11 years of our existence, we have delivered very complicated analytic solutions for more than 30 happy customers. And the solutions that we have delivered are being used by more than 10,000 business users across different companies. Coming to our analytic services, we can categorize them into 3 different broad areas. The first one is the Think services, which is more about building this strategic analytics roadmap for an organization that wants to start from scratch on their analytics journey. The second one is Build, which is about delivering an analytics solution from ground zero for the business users to use them on their day-to-day life. And the third one, Run, is about managing those solutions that are in production on an ongoing basis so that business users can keep leveraging those analytic solutions uninterruptedly throughout their working days. We have domain expertise across many different horizontals and verticals. We have done solutions in financials, procurement, human resource, supply chain planning, order management, and fulfillment. And these are some of the areas in which we have delivered very, very comprehensive analytic solutions. Similarly, from an industry standpoint, we have deep domain expertise in manufacturing, pharma, food and beverages, asset leasing, semiconductor, and some of the public sector industries as well. So this is a brief overview of who we are as an analytics specialized company. Moving on to some of the key customers that we have worked with. Next slide, please, Jaykant. These are some of the key customers that we have worked with very closely to build an analytic solution and deliver them to their business users from scratch. As we work through building supply chain planning and supply chain execution analytics for many of these customers, we have seen that supply chain planning and execution can be a very, very complex process for many organizations, depending on the nature of products they deal in and the type of industries they belong to. So today, I'm pleased to join by my second panelist, Mr. Sukanta Padi, who brings in more than 30 years of domain expertise in the supply chain planning and execution space. So I would like to, continue this discussion with Mr. Padi and ask him about the different challenges that he has experienced during his more than 30 years of working with various different organizations in the supply chain planning and execution space. Over to you, Sukanta.
Thank you, Shyam, and good morning and good afternoon or good evening to all the attendees. So let me start. Jayakant, can you put the next slide, please? Yeah. So let us start by, the question which Shyam, you asked, that what are the challenges which the supply chain planners or supply chain leaders face? So based on my experience over last, 3 decades, I could categorize them into broadly 3 categories of challenges. The first 2 are the strategy level, and the third one is basically at operational level. Now, the first one, which is basically how does the supply chain leader manage the conflicting goals inherent in the business, right? So that's the first one. The second one is how does the supply chain leader manage the risks in the supply chain network so that the customer's interests are protected? So these 2 are very strategic in nature, and these are huge challenges, especially in this today's VUCA world, right? And the third one is basically managing the day-to-day challenges, which are, I call it as operational challenges, and these are especially to deal with the uncertainties or the variability in the demand and supply side, right? So these are essentially the 3 business challenges. Let me first talk about the conflicting part, okay? So we all know that, positive cash flow and profitability are the primary financial goals of any business, right? And profitability is achieved by increasing revenues while reducing the costs. I mean, this is very, very fundamental. So the objective of the supply chain planning process is to achieve maximum fulfillment of demand while minimizing the cost in the supply chain. So here, the conflicting objectives are arising, right? And the supply chain leader has to manage these conflicting goals. We all know that achieving lower costs generally requires lower inventory, higher production or throughput, and high utilization of resources in the supply chain, right? So that's on the cost part. But achieving higher sales would require us to be more responsive and agile and have higher variability in the supply chain, right? And this will require the supply chain planner to plan for higher inventory because you need to respond to the, the customer demand. So therefore, we need to have buffer in terms of inventory or capacities. And which means that we will have higher inventory and lower capacity utilization. Now, here are the inherent conflicting goals which the supply chain planner or the leader have to manage. And these are natural conflicts exist in any business, and they can't be eliminated, right? And supply chain planners need to manage these conflicts, right? And the best way to manage these conflicts is to quantify objectively these, the trade-offs which are necessary for addressing these conflicts. And here I feel, Shyam, the analytics, supply chain planning analytics, face of, can be a great enabler to the supply chain planners and supply chain leaders. So I just want to understand from you, what are the, supply chain analytics capabilities, you suggest to, manage these conflicting objectives or to manage these trade-offs?
Thanks, Sukanta, for that interesting challenge thrown at me, trying to address how to solve this challenge for supply chain planners using analytics to balance between revenue and cost so that they can maximize profitability. One of the ways that supply chain planners need to plan is to plan for capacity, right? Now, to increase profitability, as Sukanta, you mentioned, we need to increase revenue and reduce cost. So to increase revenue, we need to plan for as much capacity as possible, in an ambitious way, so that leads to higher revenue. But at the same time, the increased capacity also increases the cost for capital, the cost for inventory carrying cost, and many other costs like obsolescence, expiration, etc. So planners need to look at how much capacity, be it machinery and production capacity, be it human resource capacity, etc., how to balance between too much capacity and too low, so that it strikes the optimum balance between the two. And analytics plays a big role by providing that visibility, where they can compare the capacity to the expected production, the forecasted demand, and the expected inventory that is required to meet that demand. So that is one aspect. The other aspect is to look at the forecast accuracy on an ongoing basis. We typically plan for a 5-year horizon, depending on the nature of the business. And the sales team, they put in their forecast numbers based on obviously past numbers and some expectations in future. Now, their goal is to maximize the revenue. And sometimes that can drive them to put very, very unrealistically high numbers. But planners need to look at how are we meeting those numbers as the periods become from future to past. Is there a very low forecast accuracy? Because that can result in a lot of inventory that is lying around, increasing the inventory carrying cost, and also obsolescence and expiration costs. So this is another way analytics can be leveraged for planners to look at forecast accuracy and make the corrective changes for the upcoming future periods. The third way they can optimize the balance between the revenue and cost is to look at the projected inventory balance, whether it's based on days on hand or months on hand of inventory. Every industry has a certain band between which the months on hand of projected inventory needs to be. It can be 3 to 5 or 4 to 6, depending on, or for some of them, it can be even a wider range. Whether the projected inventory is staying within those limits. If not, then there is something that is wrong that needs to be changed, be it forecast for the demand, be it the procurement of supply, or the yield, or the work in progress material. So that needs to be corrected. And the fourth one, which is manufacturing yield, supplier lead time, these are some of the inputs that go towards the planning process. How much inventory and how much finished goods can be produced, with a specific capacity and forecast. All these do not change pretty quickly, but they change over time as an organization becomes more and more efficient. The manufacturing yield can get better and better. The supplier lead time can get shorter as a supplier stabilizes in supplying raw material to an organization. So as these things change, they need to be taken into account to make the planning more efficient, more accurate. And these are some of the examples. There are many such examples that we can think of where supply chain planning analytics can play a huge role in balancing between revenue and cost so that we can maximize profit.
Yes, I agree. Yes, these are some of the analytics which definitely help the supply chain planner to manage the trade-offs or manage these conflicting goals of the supply chain. Now, let me come to the second category of challenges which the supply chain planners face is how to manage the risks in the supply chains so that the customers are protected or customers' interests are protected. Now, we know that in the last 10 years or more, quite a number of organizations have been really rocked by these unforeseen vulnerabilities and disruptions, right? Be it the COVID pandemic or be it the Suez Canal crisis, which blocked the entire sea logistics, right? Or be it the geopolitical, risks like the war, right? So these are major disruptions which are causing really the supply chain to be very nervous, right? And multiple organizations have struggled with these cyber security breaches, losing critical intellectual properties due to failures in the supplier ecosystem. And if you look at it, there are at the heart of these crises is a common theme, is essentially the lack of robust processes to both identify the risks as well as manage these growing supply chain risks as the world becomes more interconnected, right? And we have two kinds of risks in the supply chain. One is known risks, and the second one is unknown risks. Now, the known risk can be easily identified because these are kind of known to the supply chain network planners and actors, right? And the unknown risks are very difficult to predict. Like, for example, geopolitical risk like war, and it's very difficult to predict beforehand. You can just sense it, right? But you can't really predict it. Or disruptions like let's say the Suez Canal. It cannot be predicted. These are all unknown risks, right? But if you come to the known risks, which are easily identified and can be managed with a proper management plan, like for instance, a supplier bankruptcy leading to a disruption in the supply chain. Yeah. So that's definitely one of the things which you can easily predict. And, similarly, let's say a bankruptcy of a customer, right? The customer, if is one of your strategic customer, you're heavily dependent on them, and suddenly this customer goes out of becomes bankrupt, then you're sitting on the pile of inventory which are made for the customers, and if specifically if it is made to order, then you really struggled with those kind of obsolete inventory, right? So that's one of the things. It's not only impacting your revenue all of a sudden, it also impacts your inventory. So these are the risks which we all know, and this can be easily identified and predicted in advance and can be managed, right? So what are some of the analytical capabilities Shyam, we have to manage this supply chain network risks?
Thanks, Shukranta, for throwing this second category of challenges in supply chain to me, and seeing how we can resolve some of these by leveraging supply chain planning analytics. One of the ways we can look at is having a backup recourse capacity, be it again, contract manufacturers or contract resources, contract fillers, packers, movers, that can be taken advantage of during certain changes in demand or supply, especially if there is a certain spike in demand, like how we saw the demand for tissue paper unreasonably went up at the beginning of the pandemic, for no explainable reason. But if we have analytics, it can allow us to get that visibility and be able to respond to that pretty quickly. The other ways we can look at some of these risks early on is by integrating data into the analytics, not just the data that is within the organization, but also from external sources. Like, for example, we can integrate customer business scores and supplier business scores from Dun & Bradstreet or Hoover's and many other different sources that measure the organizational business health. This will allow us to know well in advance if a certain organization is about to go bankrupt. We can see this coming based on different business indicators, and accordingly we can reduce our demand that we expect from a certain customer if they're sensed to be bankrupt in a few months, so that we don't end up with a lot of inventory that is lying unused, increasing cost, and also we will be at the risk of expiration and obsolescence. Similarly, if a supplier also has similar indication, then we need to fall back on our backup suppliers who are there for us to help as an organization during these kind of emergency situations, to provide that contract manufacturing capacity or human resource capacity or moving and packing. These are possible if we have integration of both internal as well as external data into the supply chain planning analytics solution. And in addition to that, we can also integrate market data that also allows us to go beyond individual organizations and look at the market as a whole. For example, the demand for semiconductor chips went very high during the pandemic, and the electronic manufacturers struggled due to the long wait time for getting the semiconductor chips. Now, this is something that is market driven. It's not driven by any individual supplier or customer, but supply chain planning analytics consolidates all of this and provides that holistic view so that organizations can take a proactive approach rather than reactive approach towards supply chain planning. Over to you, Sukanta.
Yeah, thank you, Shyam. Okay, for that elaborating on the capabilities to handle the supply chain risks. And my third category of challenge for the supply chain planners is to, how do they manage the variability in the demand and supply on a very day-to-day level? And these are not the major disruptions as we mentioned in the second category, like the supply bankruptcy or the pandemic. These are not those kind of disruptions. These are the variability which exist in your the process and system, right? And the variability could be inherent in the demand and supply process or could be induced by the organization's actions. Let me give you an example of what I mean by this variability induced by the organizations. For example, we are all aware of the will-whip effect. That means while your endpoint demand is more or less constant, but we have the gaming of the various supply chain actors in the upward process, and thereby a small change in the demand or in the downstream supply chain gets really very amplified in the back-end supply chain. And this happens, this is what I call as the gaming, which is caused by the various actors in the supply chain. The second type of organization action which causes variability are some of these sales and promotion actions, like you have schemes, you have discounts, you have sales incentives. These are all the behaviors of various actors in the supply chain. This changes the behaviors of various actors in the supply chain, and these causes variability right from the demand point back to the supply point, right? So, and these are the pretty inherent in the day-to-day processes, and really the supply chain planner, poor fellow, have to deal with all these variabilities. Correct. So, what analytical capabilities do you have to manage these kind of variability in both supply and demand on an operational level, that is on a daily basis?
Yeah, this is great to hear about the operational aspects as well, because this is where planners spend majority of their time, right? The first two we talked about were strategic and kind of mid-strategic level of challenges in the supply chain planning process. But this is where 80 to 90% of planners spend their time in addressing day-to-day challenges. And the way we can leverage analytics is, first we can gain real-time visibility into our actual demand data and compare them to forecast on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to see whether we are staying within the statistical range of upper limit and lower limit for the actual numbers versus the forecast numbers. If we see that we are going beyond the higher limit or going below the lower limit, then analytics can proactively alert the supply chain planners by way of emails, by way of notification on their mobile devices, so that they can take proactive action before it is too late. Be it a demand went up and the production needs to be increase for the subsequent, immediate subsequent future periods, or the inventory is high because of high yield, or because the cycle count metrics turned out that we have more inventory than the system of record told us that is there. So for various reasons, the actual numbers of demand, inventory can vary very, very greatly from the forecast numbers, right? I mean, just by the nature of any business, it will anyway be different. But then there are additional factors as well, which can make them vary significantly. And we need to have that visibility, whether they are staying within this statistical range for us to worry or not. So that is one way of leveraging analytics. The other one is to look at the availability of finished goods and the projected inventory for the future periods. So this is again an area that every company that has a supply chain, needs to keep a close eye on, whether your months on hand inventory, days on hands of inventory are within the lower limit and upper limit or not. Because based on the actual supply of the manufactured goods, or based on the demand being low or high, the projected balance can go haywire. So having that 360-degree visibility, comprehensive analytics provides you that opportunity to planners to make the corrective changes before it's too late. And then last but not least, expirations, scraps, these are additional factors that play into the actual numbers of inventory that we have versus what we see in the system. So it's possible that we had pretty good, healthy projected inventory balance as of yesterday for the future periods, but there was a cycle count adjustment 2 weeks later because of the physical count of inventory in the warehouses, and suddenly we see that our projected inventory balance has gone below the minimum required safety stock, for example, and we need to scramble as planners to supplement for that lack of healthy balance, and bring it back to the expected bandwidth or expected band for the projected inventory balance. So scrap is again another thing that is very unpredictable. It can happen because of damages, because of spoiling, or because of even theft can or lost inventory can result in changes to the inventory level. So as is, the supply chain planner's job is a very, very challenging and difficult job, with supply chain planning analytics, with that big picture view to everything that you have planned for and how the execution is happening, is a handy way to have complete control, by monitoring at the data on a real-time basis, on an ongoing basis, that gives you a peaceful sleep in the night.
Good, very interesting. Yes, I would say that this is, as you said, 80% of the time of supply chain planner go into managing this day-to-day crisis. I would say crisis management, and so there's a concept called supply chain control tower, which you just said that you first build the visibility of end-to-end supply chain. Then on top of that visibility, you put in this analytics to throw insights, which is basically beyond the statistical control limit, and that go into what we call as an exception monitor or alert monitor, or called early warning system. And through that early warning system, then you can just put basically a supply chain event management, or or assigning the task to somebody to basically take action, and then do a kind of closed loop PDCA to close that particular action to put back the supply chain onto track. So that's really good. Essentially, we have covered all the kinds of challenges which the supply chain planner face, right? So it's been very interesting discussion. Yes, Jaikant. Then what are we doing? We're going to the question and session now, or next
The demo.
we have something.
Yeah. Thanks, Sham and Sukanta, for the insightful and informative session. Moving on, so we'll have a short demo. Over to you, Srikant.
Thank you, Jay. So next slide, please. So let me walk you through the challenges with supply chain analytics, its business advantages, and the essential visualizations needed to understand how well a company is performing. Supply chain organizations have always been vulnerable to disruption with companies' continuous growth, size, and global expansion. It gets challenging to get visibility into business processes across supply chain planning due to many reasons like planning data maintained in Excel files, having a limited view of inventory projection, and challenges consolidating data from disparate data sources. Data analytics tools can help companies overcome these challenges. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of supply chain analytics? The effective use of data and analytical tools will enable your organization to improve the performance of your supply chain. Implementing supply chain analytics will help create a single source of truth for both localized and global planning data. This will increase visibility into planning data, helps monitor overall health of planning processes, and increases the speed of ROI. Next slide, please. So what are the key supply chain analytics dashboards? In the early stages of a supply chain analytics initiative, we suggest starting by targeting 3 key analytics dashboards. This provides some examples of key analytics dashboards. Let me dive into some of these key dashboards. So the main purpose of MRP dashboard is to identify the items below safety stock or with a material shortage. This dashboard will help the buyer or planner to validate the result of the MRP calculation and maintain planning item attributes. So forecast accuracy. Accurate forecasting will reduce uncertainty. The benefits of good forecasting include the ability to attain excellent product availability with reduced safety stocks, minimize waste, as well as better margins. This dashboard highlights the numbers where the average forecast accuracy is less than 80%. So inventory overview dashboard provides insight into the performance of the planning team by measuring the months on hand using the key metrics like beginning balance, demand, replenishment, and ending inventory. So months on hand dashboard. So months on hand is the number of months of available inventory that exists if no new purchases were made and sales continue as forecasted. If the months on hand is not in the expected range, the user will need to investigate and fix the procurement and planning process. So this is a detailed production plan dashboard. The increased stability and effectiveness of production plans and schedules improves raw materials planning and procurement. So our process manufacturing solution provides you with powerful pre-packaged dashboards that contain essential business metrics, attributes, reports, and dashboards to help you make the best decisions for your business. So our dashboard reports provides an in-depth and comprehensive view of your operations with metrics like inventory expiration, production batch transactions. You can move on to the next slide. Process manufacturing scrap reports, usage variance. So with these reports, you can gain valuable insights into the performance of your operations and identify areas of improvement. Next slide, please. Variance report provides comprehensive insights into actual material usage versus planned usage, including actual usage quantity, actual usage amount, planned usage amount, and the variance amount. Next slide, please. So the production batch transactions report emphasizes the missing data entry from the day of manufacturing activities. Through detailed analysis, it identifies the batches where manufacturing data entry didn't occur with the planned or actual timeline of a batch. This report provides insights into how and why data entry errors occur, as well as potential solutions to ensure that data entry occurs within the desired time frame. Next slide, please. Batch status report provides clear visibility into firm production batches and batches that are planned to begin in the next 2 weeks, enabling the manufacturing team to easily identify which batches needs to be firmed and which can be canceled, thus helping to optimize resources and reduce costs. Scrap report provides crucial information regarding the quantity and value of inventory that is being scrapped in a manufacturing process. This data can help you identify the root causes of scrap-related losses so that you can take measures to minimize them. So this is a use case or the work that we have done for a biotechnology company. So the client has implemented various enterprise scale systems, including Oracle e-business suite, Demantra, Oracle ASCP to support their growth ambition. However, despite these investments, basic reporting and visibility into data and business processes remained a challenge across corporate functions. So Dialytics partnered with this customer in several analytics initiatives. The main ones are supply chain planning, manufacturing, demand forecasting, and there are other horizontal solutions that we have worked. So the benefits that the client got is we have provided efficient planning decisions based on the latest supply chain planning data, accurate demand forecasting, increased supply chain efficiency, and reduced inventory holding costs. It also helped identify opportunities for business process improvements and ensure compliance with FDA SIA reporting expectations. So that's all.
Thanks, Srikanth. So now the floor is open for the question and answer session. Anyone has any questions, you can just put in the chat and the panelists will answer them. I think we have got one question.
Okay, we have a question. Our supply chain planning is done in Excel spreadsheets. Can we implement supply chain planning analytics? I can take that question. Absolutely. The supply chain planning can be done in Excel or can be done in a very, very sophisticated, complicated planning engine. Either way, the output of the supply chain planning data can be integrated into the supply chain planning analytics so that you can get side-by-side view of what your actual looks like in comparison to the planned data. Any organization that is executing supply chain, obviously will have planning, whether that is done in Excel or done is in a very, very sophisticated engine. because without planning, the execution is like flying blind, right? Without having any visibility to what we are trying to do. So it doesn't matter where the supply chain planning data is, Excel or some other file or in a database or in cloud. In any case, those can be integrated into the supply chain planning analytics to give you that control over your execution.
Right. So I think the second question which has come in is, how do you measure the performance of an end-to-end supply chain? Let me take that question, Shyam. So here, the best method which I have personally found to measure the performance of an end-to-end supply chain is by using the SCORE framework. And the SCORE recognizes five five type of performance indicators. I would say 5 different types of indicators. The first one is reliability of your supply chain, which means that how reliably are you servicing your customers. For example, one of the KPIs which I can think of is to measure reliability is OTIF, that is on time in full, right? So, every time if you're on time in full, service levels is, let's say, more than 95%, which means that you're 95% of the time delivering your customers' requirement on time and in full quantities. So that's just like one example of measuring the reliability of supply chain. The second type of performance category is your responsiveness. Responsiveness is essentially on the time axis, how quickly are you, are fulfilling the demand, right, with respect to the customer's expectations. So essentially, responsiveness is measured through, let's say, a order fulfillment cycle time. Okay, so that's a lead time to fulfill the order. And if that lead time is more than the customer's expectations, then you are not responsive. The third category of performance is agility. Agility is different than responsiveness because responsiveness is on time dimension, agility is on the quantity dimension, which is basically if there is an upside to the demand, are you able to agile enough to respond to that upside? Or if it's a downside to the demand, right, are you nimble enough to scale down your operations and still be cost competitive? So that's the agility part. Right, these are the 3 typical, performance parameters, and the next 2 are on the cost and asset management efficiency. When I say cost, it's the total supply chain cost. This is cost to plan, cost to procure, and cost to deliver, cost to make, and return cost. All of that put together.
Thank you, Sukanta. There is another question from the audience. We are not a manufacturing organization. Is supply chain planning analytics relevant for us? I can take that question since it is in analytics space. So irrespective of whether you are a manufacturing organization or not, you still have a supply chain. Manufacturing being there adds to the complexity of the supply chain, but not being a manufacturing organization doesn't really make it any simple either. You could be just a trading organization that buys goods wholesale and then packs it into smaller boxes and then labels them and then sells it to retail customers. That doesn't make the supply chain any less complicated than having manufacturing also as part of the supply chain breakdown. So you would still need a supply chain planning analytics because you would still need to plan for how much you need to buy goods in bulk or in wholesale based on your end customer retail demand, and how you need to pack them, label them, and ship them to the warehouses, and from the warehouses to the different end shops or end locations. So doing all this requires planning, and when you execute, you would want to see how well you are executing based on your plan. And so So supply chain planning analytics is still relevant even if you are not a manufacturing organization. We have one last question that I see on the Q&A. If someone has already implemented a supply chain analytics solution, do they need to implement a supply chain planning analytics solution additionally? The answer is, having a supply chain analytics solution is great. It's nice. But without having the planning aspect integrated into that, does not give you the comprehensive view into your performance. It is like doing things without knowing what the goals are. So you can see that you are doing something, but you don't know whether it's a good measure of the level of performance you are doing or not. And that measurement can only come into picture when we compare what we have achieved with what our goals were. So if you have implemented a supply chain analytics solution and it does not have planning, then your supply chain analytics solution is not a complete solution. So we would highly recommend that either you integrate the planning data into the supply chain analytics, or definitely have a supply chain planning analytics solution separately from supply chain execution analytics.
I think there's one more question, which is which one is recommended, an efficient supply chain or a responsive supply chain? So that's a great question. So efficient supply chain, or you can call it a lean supply chain, is where efficiency is the main driver, getting more out of less. This means that you are planning for higher level of capacity utilization in the system, right? And you're planning for lower inventory or minimizing the inventory to the possible extent. So this is basically what we're calling as an efficient or lean supply chain. On the other hand of the spectrum, you have a responsive or agile supply chain, which is basically focused on fulfilling the demand as fast as it can. And the market qualifier in case of responsive supply chain is your responsiveness, which is lead time to serve. And in case of efficient supply chain, the market qualifier is essentially the cost. So one side you have a service level, other side you have the cost. They're the two extremes of let's say lean or efficient supply chain versus responsive supply chain. Now there's no one size fit all solutions to this efficient is good or responsive is good. So it depends on the context, or it depends on the situation. So essentially when we what we need to do is we need to segment the products into different categories, or essentially two categories, basis their characteristics of both demand as well as supply. And if you have a let's say very stable demand, very predictable demand, the variability of demand is very low, and variability of the lead times on the supply side is also very low. It's a very functional product, right? And it's a mass production, repetitive manufacturing kind of a scenario. There you go in for the lean supply chain or efficient supply chain. But on the other hand, if your product characteristics are like a very innovative products, like it's very configurable product, and there is a high variety of product, and your predictability of demand is very, very low, right? In that case, I think the responsive or agile supply chain is the best. And in certain cases, you have a mix of both. It's what is called as a hybrid strategy, that you have both lean as well as agile, called sometimes referred to as legile, right? So that's also a strategy which is adopted essentially to take care of both or trade-off of both efficiency as well as responsiveness. Essentially to what the strategy is to decouple the supply chain, make part of it very efficient and the rest part of it's responsive. And analytics can play a very enabling role in terms of segmenting your product depending on the past demand, characteristics and the supply characteristics.
I think we are done. I think no more questions. Thanks, Shyam. Thanks, Shukanta, and thanks, Shrikant.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone,
Thank
for
you.
attending this webinar. You will receive a link to the recorded webinar by tomorrow. Everyone, thanks. Have a great day.